What's up, YouTube? So today I want to talk about probably the nerdiest drum synthesis technique. And this is a really cool way of creating really realistic snare drum sounds, but still being able to synthesize them so you have full control over your tuning envelopes, each harmonic, and that kind of thing. So really in-depth control over your snare sounds, but the results are still very realistic. So, like I said, it's pretty nerdy and pretty technical, so it's not for everybody, but bear with me and stick around because this discovery was pretty awesome, and it's not just limited to snare synthesis. You can kind of develop this technique for a lot of different things because it's made up of kind of different components. So the main idea will be done with all free tools and built-in DAW components. But one thing to know is that I'm using Bitwig Studio, which has the grid built in, which is a bit of a modular system. So when we start talking about the resonator part of things, it might be a little bit confusing if you're not a Bitwig user. But yeah, you're welcome to develop this idea in any DAW that you choose, and let me know the results. I'm going to post my Discord link in the description and stuff. So anyway, this was a result of a conversation that happened quite a while back with one of my Inner Circle Patreons, Bo, who we were discussing physical modeling of drum sounds, and he had stumbled upon a study where they had figured out some kind of modal interactions with the snares, and I found that particularly interesting, and that kind of helped me to develop this technique. The blabbering out the way, let's actually dive into the sound design process. So this is the rack that I've built. It consists of Zebralet 3, which is a free plugin. Still in beta, but I definitely suggest you check this out if you're into sound design, because one of the best concepts in synthesis in the last couple of years, in my opinion. So basically, Zebralet 3 into an EQ, very basic low cut, then into the resonator rack, which we're going to build. This does get a little bit technical, like I said, but bear with me. Saturator, Valhalla, Supermassive, these are two free plugins. Definitely suggest getting both of these. And then FurComp 2, which is not a free plugin, but your built-in DAW compressor will work. It's just to control the overall levels coming out of the rack. I've kind of designed this to give us control over whether we want to snare the snare. You know, we want the actual springs on or off. So we can kind of mix between the top and bottom, which is pretty cool. And then we have various kind of decay settings as well. So I'm not going to go through the entire process of like what all is linked to what. What I'll do is I'll upload this preset to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. And then what I'll do is I'll talk through the concept of how we came to this. Because I feel like that's the most important thing, right? Unless you want this exact snare sound. But I mean, samples are a dime a dozen these days. I think the concept here is the most important thing, right? So we're going to go through why it sounds like a snare, okay? Let's just start off with an instance of Zebralet 3. We're going to want to set this into additive mode. We can set the resolution up and we can turn drift off. What additive mode is, as opposed to like traditional wavetable mode, is additive mode gives us the ability to control individual partials using this spectral distortion system over here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to pull up a spectrograph so I can show you visually what's happening, why this is like the realistic drum synthesis kind of technique as opposed to other ones, right? So if we turn curve morph over to the triangle, we have very basic kind of harmonic structure of the sound. So saw waves, full harmonics, triangles, just the low and rolled off top harmonics. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this expansion mode, and when we turn up the spectral distortion, notice how the tuning of the harmonics is not exact intervals. So when we change the pitch of a sound, the space between these intervals, like the intervals between these harmonics, remains the same. Or it's kind of scaled depending on the pitch, right? But when we use the spectral distortion in expansion mode, it changes that balance. Do you see that? So if we set this up to act a little bit more like a drum sound, so how we do that is we turn the sustain down on the envelope all the way. We can turn the release down quite a bit and the decay down quite a bit until we just get that little pluck. What I like to do is also set up an extra envelope here on the MSeg just to give us a little bit more volume control. And what we can do is we can actually apply that MSeg to this curve morph as well. What that allows us to do is just add a little bit more of that saw wave harmonics just at the beginning of the transient. Okay, let's give it some velocity sensitivity. Let's give this MSeg some velocity sensitivity as well. And now we can use this attack rate as the kind of speed for that envelope, right? We're getting there, not quite snare, but you can hear that spectral distortion gives it a much more of a realistic kind of tuning of a drum sound than the just kind of pitch shifting it, right? I think it's due to the fact that like a drum is circular and the tension points are equidistant from each other. So you're tensioning them at like, say for example, 6 or 8 points rather than tuning a particular, like a single string on a guitar, which you're tensioning just 1 point. And I think the tuning of the drum skin, for example, it stretches at these 8 points, and that then causes that modal interaction. I don't know if that's making sense scientifically at all, but that's kind of just how I understand it, right? So then here what I like to do also is to add wrap and zap, which is the kind of distortion / clipping module in ZebraLED 3. Let's set this to soft clip. And then we can give it the MSeg modulation as well here. We can come back and fine-tune some of these. So for example, like I said, we can use this attack rate, this decay, and the spectral distortion as these kind of macros in the entire patch. I don't know how many of you folks have actually been following me since the early days, but very long ago, I actually did a tutorial on how I tune drum samples. This is actually an interesting thing that kind of came about as a result of this. If we look at a saw wave, and we use a frequency shifter, right? So I'm just going to use kilohertz frequency shifter. It's nice and simple. And if we send a saw wave through to this, the frequency shifter is a similar interaction in terms of the harmonics, how it doesn't balance them, it doesn't keep the intervals intact like a pitch shift does. It kind of scales them independently. And I believe this is why the frequency shifter kind of sounds a little bit more realistic when tuning drum samples than actually changing the pitch of the drum samples, just because of that kind of modal interaction. Anyway, that's a little bit of a side topic. So we've set up the source. Let's add an EQ just to cut out some of the low frequencies. Okay, so let's talk about the next part in the chain. This is kind of a separate system that came about with sort of other research that I was doing, where this particular device doesn't actually take audio input, right? It's just a sine wave pluck that then is sent to a bunch of mod delays, which are set up as resonators. And these inputs are fed from a system that I call the Crossmod matrix. So I'm going to explain this shortly, right? But essentially what that's doing is that's modulating the times of these mod delays ever so slightly. And then those are all fed into a mixer and then saturator and then to the output. So like I said, this concept came from something separate, but then once I discovered that modal thing with ZebraLED, I was like, wait, what if we feed that tone into this resonator matrix? You know, because it sounds cool, it sounds snare drum-ish, but the transient just doesn't have that realism. Do you know what I mean? We can tune these, but it's still not quite there. Let me explain the idea of the Crossmod matrix, right? So I was doing some research and I stumbled upon another video with some obscure modular synthesis program. I can't even remember what it's called. And I, to be honest, can't remember the creator. I'm going to try my best to link it in the description as well. This guy was basically explaining a technique of creating really realistic acoustic snare resonators using a technique called a householder matrix. A householder matrix is essentially a system which, I guess the sort of rudimentary explanation of it, I'm probably going to get this wrong, so feel free to correct me in the comments, is a system that's designed to kind of equally distribute outputs. The issue that I had when trying to build that in the grid is that the system revolves around feedbacks. So like feeding one of the inputs into the other one and doing calculations and that kind of thing. And so I couldn't quite get that system working, but I hacked an idea that kind of works in a similar way, but differently. So the Crossmod matrix, what I'll do is I'll explain one of the elements of it, and then you can derive the rest, because it's four that kind of feed back into each other, which then control these. Okay? So the Crossmod matrix tries to emulate that kind of equal distribution of power to the outputs, but it uses the phase of a sine wave. So here, for example, you can see this constant is setting the sine wave to 1 of the phase. So it's 1 full repeat. This one is 1/4, so it's at the top of the cycle. This one is a half, so it's at the 0 part of the cycle. And this is 0.75, so it's at the bottom part of the cycle. So by using a sine wave and offsetting the phase of 4 voices, you're able to kind of get that equal distribution to the output. So then the phase of that then sends to this delay, which then sends to a sum, which then feeds back to the other matrices. Okay, so I'm hoping that somebody much more intelligent than myself sees this and be like, hey, you know that there's a much easier way of doing it. You just use this one device. Or somebody just kind of makes one plugin that resonates like this. That would be really cool. The idea of that equal distribution. So essentially, imagine if these are 4 springs attached to the bottom of a surface, right? And you have pressure applied to that spring. Those springs resonate against each other and kind of find an equilibrium. I don't know if that's, again, the right way of explaining it. But they feed off each other and they kind of feed back to each other. And in doing that, they kind of, that's how they create that kind of noise resonance. Do you know what I mean? If there was just one spring, it would have a tone. The moment you introduce several springs, they have that feedback interaction. I guess that's why that matrix system is so important, to get that realistic resonance. Whew. Okay, I hope I explained that correctly. So what I did was I kind of took the sine wave and replaced it with an audio input. I didn't actually replace it though. I used a blend, because what the blend allows us to do is mix from just the raw resonator signal into like the one that's mixed between the input and the output, right? Oh, sorry, this is in the wrong place. This needs to come here after this, right? So this is part of the source sound, okay? So the blend needs to come here, and then we're blending the inputs this way. Okay, so let's fine-tune these delay times. That's a cool way of like quickly varying the kind of sound of the resonator. Okay, we're getting there. We're getting there. Okay, so the next part of the chain is Melda M Saturator. You can also, something that you can do is also use something like Transient Shaper here. Instead of actually going into the grid and creating envelopes and stuff that way, you can use a Transient Shaper here to kind of shape the sound if you want to shape it some more. like after the fact. M-Saturator, this can also help to give us a little bit more of a realistic drum punchiness. What I usually do here is pump the harmonics and turn the output down a little bit. That often ends up making the decay within ZebraLed a lot more audible, so I'll go in here and kind of tune that down a little bit. What we can also do is set up a blend here at the output, or perhaps just before the saturation stage in the grid, and then that'll allow us to blend from just the raw input to the overall output, right? Oh, that sounds good. I like that. Valhalla Supermassive just for extra little bit of room sound. This I usually just mix a little bit. And then I'll just use built-in DAW compressor for this. That just helps to kind of like punch down the transient a little bit so it doesn't hit as hard. I'll usually turn off the makeup and kind of do this on my own. So I can kind of set the level this way. Cool, that's sounding good. Let's try send this through big reverb, just for effects. Oh, there we go. So like I said, you can also use this technique to create weird percussive synth sounds, because you can kind of blend between that top and the bottom. Do you know what I mean? You can kind of just use that. Or you can kind of blend in a little bit of that resonance and get like really experimental with it. Really cool technique. Okay, I think that's about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you think in the comments. Like I said, I'm going to be uploading this entire rack. I'll probably swap out the fur comp just so that you can use it with all the free tools. Yeah, I'm going to be uploading that rack to my Patreon for all my $5 supporters. And let me know what you think in the comments. If you like this kind of really weird, obscure, nerdy sound design stuff, let me know. If you want the more simple stuff as well, obviously, let me know. But yeah, that's about it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed that. Don't forget the like button. Don't forget the subscribe button if you haven't yet. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time. Cheers.